oh my, we learned a lot of information this week. A lot of funny information, but a lot of important information as well. Number one, let's talk about aura and semblance. So, it's very apparent by the way Rooster Teeth is building it up in the recent episodes that John is definitely getting his semblance this season, which I'm truly excited for. I'm really excited. As I've already said, I've been waiting for John to get his semblance for a while, because he's one of those characters that really piques my interest, because he started off as someone that really couldn't do much, but you see he was a proud person that wanted to be great. He wanted to be someone that could do something, and Pyrrha had a very big impact on him as a character. And throughout the series, we've seen how much Pyrrha changed him, and when he lost her, we see how much it affected him, especially in the last season. And one of the big things that many have been waiting for a very long time is when he finally activates his semblance. And it seems like that is probably going to be happening very soon. Now, I want to bring up something that this episode obviously is trying to let us know, what Rooster Teeth is trying to let us know. There is too many cases that we can see throughout this episode and from other characters and stuff from previous, seasons. Many characters tend to get their semblance when they're going through some form of stressful event, traumatic event, or when they're in the heat of combat or something. That is when all of them seem to somehow get their semblance. For instance, Nora, struck by lightning. RWBY, how she was fighting him and she got her semblance. And then, now John, you'd think if it was something linked to trauma, he would have already unlocked it since, what happened to Pyrrha. But that's the thing, though. Maybe when he finally meets up with Cinder, that's when he'll probably unlock his semblance, since he'll probably have a lot of anger and rage. Every time you see him on screen, John looks so depressed. He looks really upset and depressed, and we know he still carries this weight with him. We can see that when we saw Lionheart a couple episodes back. He's still very upset about this, just the way he carries himself. And so, I wonder, by the way Rooster Teeth is hinting at this, with him getting his semblance, but also it linked to, something to do with trauma, there's a possibility that when he meets Cinder again, he might unlock his ability and then go all out against her to get vengeance or something. Who knows? So, anyways, let's talk about Nora for a second. So, Nora says she got her semblance by being struck by lightning. Crazy Thursday. I love Nora. I really love Nora. I mean, just how she has been acting in the recent seasons. I'm really loving all the screen time she's gotten. I really like Nora. And just seeing how she acted and all that, I couldn't get enough of it. I replayed that scene a couple of times, because it just was funny. Now, obviously, comedy is subjective, so if you didn't like it, obviously, it just comes down to personal taste. But, I thought that scene was just truly funny. Now, when we talk about the training segment, we learned quite a bit, okay? Not just about how RWBY interacts with, like, Oscar or Ozpin when she's learning and how to fight and all that, but we also see how aura is handled. So, it's implied. Now, I could be not remembering this could be old information, but I could have forgotten, and if I have, correct me in the comments below, because I make mistakes, and if I make a mistake, I look forward to you guys correcting me. I really do. That's not being, I'm not being sarcastic. I'm actually legit saying, correct me if I am wrong. But I believe this is the first time we actually get some insight to how, like, semblance or aura really works. In this case, apparently the active field of aura, you have to actually activate it. It's not like a passive thing. Now, judging by what Ozpin was doing in this episode and teaching Oscar and RWBY and everybody else, it seems like eventually if you get really good at aura and your semblance and stuff, it could be more of like a subconscious thing. Yeah, subconscious, and you don't really have to always be aware of it. It comes up subconsciously. So maybe that is why we see some things like they're done, because they've just gotten so used to using their aura and stuff that they don't really need to think on it too much. But you need to practice with it before you can get to that level. And in this case, we get some insight on that it's not a passive skill. It's something that is always active, that someone has to, usually activate to have it up. So it's very interesting. It's a very interesting clarification of how some of this stuff works, but also, like I said, I feel like a lot of it's related to, like, some form of trauma. For instance, whatever's happened in their life, of how they've unlocked certain, skills and all that is because of trauma. So, let's talk about the main concept of the episode, which was Raven and Yang's meetup. Now, this is something we have all been waiting for a very long time. Maybe not as long as, like, John's semblance, but this meetup between Yang and Raven, like, finally meeting up, and, Yang knowing who Raven is and stuff, this is something we've been waiting for seasons now. And it finally happened with this episode. And I'll tell you right now, I'm very surprised with how Rooster Teeth handled this episode, especially with how Yang actually handled herself as well as a character. She really, really surprised me with what she wanted. I figured since, like, one of her big goals was to meet Raven after hunting her down for so long, she would have more to say to Raven. But I believe by the way the context was done with this scene, I think Yang found out everything she needed to know from Raven. Most likely looking at her mother and how her mother reacted to her and all these little things, you could assume that Yang got everything she wanted. She found out what she wanted, her goals, or she didn't really need to ask because she already found out how Raven probably feels about everything. And so, yeah. Another thing, too, is that Yang wants to use Raven as a way of teleportation to get to RWBY. Like that. I really like that, because this lets us know that Yang and Weiss and also RWBY are going to be meeting up very soon. And we're going to have, like, all three of them back together. It's been a while since we've seen all three of them in the same room together. And then when Blake finally gets in, that's going to be really fun to see. I can't wait to see Yang and Blake's reunion. That is something I'm really excited to see. But anyways, getting back into it, though, the entire exchange with Raven and Yang, it was a very impactful scene. There was a lot of tension there. You could feel the tension, especially by the way Rooster Teeth wrote it, and you always were looking at Raven, like they wanted to focus on Raven, showcasing how she was reacting to Yang. And every time we've seen Raven as a character, she's always seemed to be this very stuck-up character. Very stuck-up. Doesn't seem like she cares. And many might try to assume maybe she's putting on an act, but after looking at this episode, you could assume that she's a very cold-hearted individual. She's very calloused, because the way she tries to treat Yang, you could assume it's just out of common courtesy, basically. Just because she's the leader, a bandit leader and all that, you could assume the way she was acting was just because she's the bandit leader. And she normally wouldn't really want to interact with Yang at all in the first place. And that's kind of what happened. So I like that exchange and finding out a little bit more insight to Raven's character and how she interacts with Yang. Now, let's talk about Weiss for a second. So Weiss, she got out of the cage by herself, which actually makes me very happy, because I was under the impression, don't get me wrong, I know Weiss is very strong, but I was under the impression that Weiss was going to need help to get out, because after being trapped, nobody coming to save her and all that, her sister's not coming, I assumed that someone's going to have to come in and save her, like RWBY was going to come in and save her, but that was not the case. Weiss saved herself. She got out of the situation. She wasn't like a damsel in distress. She wasn't someone that needed saving. She was going to get out regardless. Even if Yang didn't pop up in this episode to save her, Weiss would have gotten out eventually. It would have been a little bit longer, but she would have gotten out eventually. And I do like that, just to show that Weiss has changed tremendously. She has changed as a character, gotten a lot stronger, but also how she's learning to use her semblance, her abilities, and all of that. I love how Rooster Teeth is taking Weiss's character, the direction of it. So anyways, moving on, let's talk about the entire training sequence. I know I kind of briefly covered it, but I want to get back into it. RWBY is learning how to use hand-to-hand combat, which is very good to see, because RWBY is most likely going to lose her weapon. It's been foreshadowed. She's probably going to lose her weapon, and she's going to resort to hand-to-hand combat. So, seeing her train in a different fighting style, it's refreshing, because we won't see the same fighting style with her weapon. We'll actually have, you know, something different to look forward to when she's in a fight. Like, if she has her weapon, like she's disarmed or whatever, she'll be able to stand up and fight with her fist and hold off opponents. So, I'm liking that. I'm liking the entire training segment, and I'm also liking how Oscar's picking up and learning how to do things. It's just really nice. And it's nice to see Ozpin being a very good teacher. He's actually teaching them how to fight. This training arc is just amazing. It's straight up amazing. Many might not care about it, but I really like the training arc we've been getting, especially for this episode. So yeah, speaking of which, is there anything else I need to cover? I'm trying to think. I think I've covered everything I need to talk about. I mean, I've covered the Weiss stuff. Oh yes, the Yang and Weiss hug. That's something I need to talk about. So that hug, gonna be real here, that my heart skipped a beat. That was a really adorable scene. Now, I'm not one of those that get into pairings and stuff. As I've always said in other series I review, I don't let pairings determine my factor of an episode or series. If, you know, a pairing doesn't happen or a certain pairing does happen, I don't get upset about it. I'm not one to get distracted and focus on that, because it's not the main concept of a story. You shouldn't focus on it. If it's a romance series, then yes, the pairings do matter. But if it's not a romance series, it doesn't matter. And so I can already see many shipping Yang and Weiss in this episode, especially after that segment with the hug. I can already see it. I can see many just saying, whoa, Chibi, do you ship those two? I gotta admit, I've always been the RWBY and Weiss shipper, but I really like the Yang and Weiss in this episode. Something about it, I don't know. That relationship was just truly funny to see, especially how they just finally met up and they hugged each other. Adorable. So, yeah, I think that's about it. I think I've covered everything I need to cover. I think one last thing I do need to mention is the Blake stuff. So, Blake scenes, we need more focus on her, because there hasn't really been much progression on her end, and I feel like next week's episode is probably going to be a full-on Blake episode, because, like I said, there's been barely any progression whatsoever when it comes to Blake, so I feel like next week we'll probably focus entirely on her, maybe a few little segments with Yang and all that, but overall I feel like it's going to be a complete Blake episode, because we need progression. If our character's going to meet up in this season, then most likely Blake is going to have an episode entirely to herself, which most likely is next week. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe, and if you like this video, please leave a like. If you don't like the video, obviously, leave a dislike. I don't fault you for it, because everybody has an opinion. So I love you guys. Please be safe. Chibi out.